And the Supreme Court heard arguments Monday centered on the LGBTQ community, religion, and the rights of business owners. The case involves a web designer in Colorado who says she should not be forced by state law to create websites for same-sex couples, claiming it conflicts with her religious beliefs. For more on this, I'm joined by Jess Bravin. He is a Supreme Court correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Jess, let's start with the American Civil Liberties Union, which wrote an op-ed in the New York Times suggesting this isn't a First Amendment question, but a question of whether businesses can pick and choose who they provide services to. Is that the right way to, well, that's not, maybe whether it's the right way or not to think of this, does that set up the central tension of this case?
Yeah, that's one of the tensions in the case. In other words, is the business picking and choosing customers or not? And that's certainly how the ACLU looks at it, and that's how the state of Colorado looks at it in the way it's applying its anti-discrimination law, which, like about half the states, covers sexual orientation. They're saying that the only people who would want a same-sex wedding are obviously gay couples, and refusing to provide services to them is discriminating against them. But of course, that's not how the other side sees it, and perhaps not how the Supreme Court will see it. Really, the question is this website designer intending to discriminate against gay people, or simply to or rather, is she simply exercising her right not to be compelled to do something that expresses a view she opposes? That's one way to look at it.
And that final bit seems to be one of the most interesting parts of this case, because it turns a conflict of rights into compelling her to speak in a certain way. So, in other words, if she did something that didn't require writing things on a cake, that was a kind of speech, that compulsion wouldn't be a part of it. But then, of course, you might get into a discussion of, well, speech can be, or compelling somebody to do something could go beyond speech. It could be any service that you're providing could be a compulsion. How much was the actual act of saying the words a part of the conversation at argument?
Well, she hasn't actually done any wedding websites. She filed a lawsuit asking for a court order saying she didn't have to comply with the Colorado anti-discrimination law. And the lower courts agreed with the state. They said that what she's proposing to do would violate the state law, and she hasn't established a constitutional right to object to it. And that's really the position that the liberal justices took at the court. They looked at the mock-ups of websites that she might do, and they all seem very generic. Like, they had messages like "save the date" and "our funny dating story" and so forth. And they sort of suggested that these are boilerplate type of elements that would appear on any kind of wedding invitation website, and they're not some kind of great creative expression where Picasso is being brought in by the Guardia Civil at gunpoint and has to do something that celebrates General Franco or something. It's not. This is something which they saw really as a commodity. That's not, of course, how the conservative.
And Jess, let me ask you about another question. This week, the Supreme Court's going to hear arguments Wednesday on the independent state legislature. In advance of that, remind people what's at issue with that case.
What's at issue is whether states have to follow their own state constitutions when they draw congressional maps. North Carolina State Supreme Court cited their own state constitution's Fair Elections Clause in throwing out what they found to be a partisan gerrymander by the state legislature. The legislature is coming back and saying, look, the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution's Elections Clause says that state legislatures will decide the time, place, and manner of congressional elections. They don't say anything about state courts. So the only check on what state legislatures can do is the U.S. Congress, which also has power to supervise those decisions. The other side says state legislatures are a creature of the state constitution and can't do anything their own state constitutions don't permit. That'll be a very interesting case, and one where the outcome may be in greater suspense than the website designer from Colorado.
Yes, indeed. Jess Bravin, thank you so much for being with us.